Octavio, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. This has been the first time in front of live people for me for about a year, so I might be a little rusty getting started, so just cut me some slack. But I'm all right. I just finished doing the final tweaks on the audio book, and the audio books of this is about 5 hours. Now, I'm not going to talk for 5 hours. I'm going to keep it about, say, 45 minutes, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. But if a question comes up as we go through, feel free to throw it at me. What I want to do is by the end of this, just have a couple of little things that you can take away. And I reckon I've got some stuff up my sleeve which can take your decision-making skills up at least 20%, maybe 50%, maybe even 100%. I'm pretty confident about that. So I was going to do a little bit of a show of hands. Hands up if you've made some bad decisions before. Hands up if you've made some really bad decisions. Hands up if you made a really bad decision and then made the same bad decision again. What's worse than that? I don't know. We could keep going. But the idea is we make these decisions and some of them work out well and some of them don't. So I'm very interested to understand what it is that causes us to make those poor decisions. And I'm really interested about, how come if we know it's a bad choice, we go ahead and do it as well. So there's those decisions where we know even before we step over the line that it's a bad choice, but we still do it. So I'm very curious about the psychology that gets us into that particular position. So my background, and I wrote this book over the course of 2020, and over the course of 2020, there were some just atrocious decisions being made, good decisions at the end, and everything in between. So it was a fascinating expose for me. And this is my 5th book, and I really write books to try and understand a subject. And I want to understand it well enough so I can share it with other people. So I was in the military for 14 years, an officer in the army. We got taught the military appreciation process, very formal decision-making process. It might take us a day or a couple of days to come to a decision. After that, working for consulting to Olympic Games and mega events for about 5 years. And because my specialty was bomb management, I was sort of decisions like when this telephone call comes in, is this a credible threat? So trying to decide, is this a credible threat? Do we need to send resources? What do we need to do with it? So very much in this formal decision-making thing. So I left after that 20 years in that security space and then started on my journey to go into coaching and studied neuro-linguistics programming, hypnotherapy, and I've been coaching for a bit over 13 years. So I've sort of merged the 2 of those, 3 of those, 4 of those together to try and understand the formal stuff and then the more mindset stuff, the more brain stuff, how we can bring those together. So that's what I've sort of put together in this book. So I've got some notes of stuff that I'm going to talk about, and I generally take things a little bit all over the place, especially when I don't have my slides up there to follow. So this might go in lots of different directions, but I just trust it will go in the right direction. Now, I arrived in Bali in end of 2007, so about September 2007. I got introduced to this guy and I stayed at this guy's place. I got introduced by this mate of mine through the army, who's a really awesome guy, but he's all over the place. He's just a train wreck. Wonderful guy, train wreck. I ended up starting to have a business conversation with this guy that I was staying with that I got introduced to by train wreck. And the first thing I've learned out of that is if someone's a train wreck, they're probably not the best people to take advice from or, referrals. Like train wreck refers, oh yeah, this is a really good, solid person, great businessman. I'm like, okay, mistake number 1. So I ended up having conversations about this business, and it was a boutique backpackers in Legian. And going into this conversation, it was going to be a boutique backpackers in Bali, then there was going to be one in Jakarta, then there was going to be one in Lombok, there was going to be in East Timor, they were going to feed into each other, it was going to be super, super awesome business. And that's how it looked on paper. So intellectualizing it looked like a really great idea. But there was a part of me like, I'm not sure whether I can call this guy a douche. I might have just called him a douche by just bringing that up, that I can't call him a douche. But so this chap that I was talking to about business, I had this feeling in my stomach that he was super shallow. He only wanted to hang around with young, good-looking women. So part of me is like, not a really strong character. But I did this thing which I now call logicalizing. So we have this intuitive sense, tells us that something's off, but we intellectualize it and we suppress it. And I think we've been conditioned for decades to become more intellectual, and I think our intuition has taken a back seat. So, that's a broader story and a broader perspective. Is one thing I think, first of all, in this decision-making thing, is to be able to drop into our intuitive sense. And that might require us to slow down. And that's why I love, this place and the work that's done at this place. It's about slowing it down. The practices here that Octavio teaches slows everything down. And, that's one of the first things to making good decisions, is slowing this process down. Checking out my notes here. Okay. So the number one thing that I think that you could take away from this conversation, and then you could nod off to sleep and you could still improve your decision making, is the ability to call a timeout. So I think this is the most important thing when it comes to decision making. And it comes down to this. So often I've seen people, and I've seen myself as well, step into making a decision when I'm not in the best physical state. So let's talk basic physiology. Hands up if you make good decisions when you're tired. Any hands up? No hands up. Good decisions when you're hungry. Who makes really good decisions about where you're going to eat when you're starving? No. When you're dehydrated, good decision, right? Like these things, like our brain, isn't at its most optimum when we don't take care of physiology. So this seems like super, super basic stuff. But the basic stuff is the stuff that's going to be a difference maker. If you come along and someone wants you to make a decision and you're feeling tired, you're feeling hungry, you're feeling dehydrated, call a timeout. So let me just, step back for 15 minutes. Let me step outside, have a drink of water, snack. I'm going to look at some greenery. I'm going to take a few breaths. I'm just going to settle myself. What you've just done is you've taken a 60% capacity to make a good decision up to probably a 90%. So I tell people, even in a professional context, boss comes in and wants a decision on something. You say, okay, boss, I'm a little bit run down. I'm a little bit frazzled. I can give you a 60% good decision now, or you can let us duck outside for 30 minutes and I'll give you a 90% solution. So it's having the courage and the good sense to create those boundaries around ourselves. So that's number one. Am I in the right physiological state to make this decision? Number two is, am I in the right emotional state? Am I in the right emotional state to make the decision at the level that I want to make it? And again, it depends on the consequence of the decision. It's if it's a low consequence, if it's trying to decide which restaurants to go to and the consequences are pretty low, it doesn't matter so much. But if it's a major decision that has a major course correction or potential for major course correction in your life, if it's something about work, if it's something about relationship, if it's something about where you're choosing to live, if it's any of those sort of things, you really want to be in the best emotional state. And that comes down to, if we talk brain, lower brain, midbrain, upper brain, cerebellum, limbic brain, cortex, or mammalian brain, reptilian brain, and then sort of frontal lobes of our brain. We want to be able to bring the attention up to this part, sharpen buddhi. We want to come from that place when we're actually making decisions. So we need to be in the right emotional state. This is the challenge at the moment with a lot of poor decision making. We actually cannot make good decisions if we're in a fear state. Like, as soon as we go into a fear state, we're dropping down, we're at the limbic brain, the midbrain level. We don't have access to this. So in a fearful state, we're not going to make our best choices. We're not going to have access to all those parts of our brain. We're not going to be wise in our decision making. So if you're not in the emotional state, and I like Joe Dispenza's terminology, an elevated emotional state, if you're not in an elevated emotional state, if you're in a survival emotional state, this state of fear or any of those other, emotions, say frustration, anger, whatever those things are going on, that's not the time to be making a decision. That's the time to be calling a time out and stepping back from it. The other thing too in decision making is the ability to discern. Because as we go into decision making, the quality of the information we have determines the output we're going to have at the other end. So in the military is intelligence. So there'd be grades and quality of intelligence. And if you had low grade intelligence, you're probably likely to make a less informed decision or less high quality decision. So again, the ability to discern. And again, I think we've got really crap at discerning the truth of information. Again, two things. One, I think because we've been conditioned through our education system to be very intellectual about things. And this has been praised, the intellectualism. And this has probably been praised for hundreds of years, like beating out this other thing, which is, the other piece of the pie of the puzzle, this intuitive sense. So if I'm in a calm state, I'm centered, I'm grounded, I have a much better ability to intuit whether the truth is coming to me, whether I'm hearing some narratives or some falsehood. So again, if we're in a fear state, we can't discern that truth. And again, I think, one of the challenges over the last 12 months plus is, people seeing sound bites of information and, using that as a piece to make a decision. I like to hear a long form conversation and I sit with it and I see the sense and the truth of it. And of late, I've been reading, a fabulous, fabulous book, Power versus Force. Who's read Power versus Force? Seriously, one of the best books on the planet. I just finished reading it for the third time. So Dr. David Hawkins, I'm okay to recommend his book out front of mine because it's about transcending levels of consciousness and looking at levels of consciousness. So powerful stuff. And he talks about when he was introduced to kinesiology, muscle testing, and using muscle testing to discern truth. So I'm very big on you can muscle test by, closing your fingers there and prying them apart and asking or making a truth statement. I need to drink more water. If it locks out, if the nervous system is closed, there's truth to that statement. If my nervous system goes weak, that means the statement isn't true. So here's a tool. Again, it's not been picked up by the mainstream medical cabal over the last 40 or 50 years that it's been around, but it's a brilliant, brilliant tool to discern truth. You can look at a person and listen to it, and you can muscle test to see the truth of what that person is speaking, where they're coming from. So it's like, read this book, Power versus Force, introduce yourself to the concept, and he muscle tests and calibrates so many different things. And one of the things I've decided, regardless of what conversation I'm having about what topic, is I'm going to inject the word courage and a conversation about courage into the conversation. Now, when it comes to decision making, it's an easy one to put in there. What I say is we can make a decision and we can go through all of the thought process, pros and cons, get to that sort of stage, but it's only a potential good decision. We don't know it's a good decision until we step over the line. And I call that line the fear barrier. Most people go to their grave with, great ideas, great decisions that they've never brought forth, because they know once they step over this line, this fear barrier, then there's the potential for feedback from the real world. So most people retreat into here. So for a start, if we want to make good decisions and enact on those, we need to have this thing called courage. And bringing it back to this power versus force, Dr. David Hawkins, he's saying in the levels of consciousness from 1 to 1,000, and that's not linear, that's logarithmic. And there's only been a few people that have calibrated 1,000, Jesus Christ, Buddha, Krishna, and a couple of others I don't know. But on this scales of consciousness, 200 is the magical marker when you start moving from lower mind into upper mind, when you start getting away from ruling by the ego and you start transcending that. So it's not that you pass 200 and ego disappears, but you start acting and behaving and moving through life in a way that is starting to move beyond reactivity to the ego. So this 200 mark is courage. Like courage is the doorway through into upper levels of consciousness. And that's why it's like, it seems like, and when you hear it, courage, it feels like a powerful thing. Brené Brown brought this to the forefront, talking about vulnerability and courage. And then when you get into this consciousness work, like that is the doorway there. So my thing is like, part of decision making and part of shaping your destiny is about, do you have the courage to make those decisions? And those decisions might be to say yes to something, say no to something. The courage to say yes to some people, no to some people. The courage to take some people and put them out of your life. Like this is the doorway point. And I think it's the ascension point for the evolution of humanity at the moment, as well as this idea of passing through this courage point. So we're all being asked to be courageous. And I think the progression of that is from, doing some courageous stuff some of the time to doing a lot of courageous stuff to being courageous to I am courageous. And on your, your tombstone or what's the headstone, chiseled out, this person was courageous. I think that's the marker that we need to head towards. That's a game changer. Any questions at this point? Anyone? I'll keep an eye on time because I could talk under wet concrete. I could talk for about 3 or 4 hours. Ferry knows full well, so she'll probably throw something at me before then. One of the things I talk about is, again, in this decision-making process, we need to make sure we don't go into that process with assumptions. So we want to turn as many assumptions into facts. And as I've written this book and gone beyond it, I'm like, even we want to take assumptions to facts and even go beyond facts to truth. Like for me, that's an even higher level quality of information to take into the decision-making process. So I work with truths, and those truths are going to allow me to make an even greater decision. So again, people might move into that decision-making process assuming, oh yeah, I think he or she means this, or I think he or she have already done this, or I think, this is like this. I think it's going to cost about that much. So I work with coaching clients and I'm like, not good enough. I want you to go into, complete specificity of this thing. Don't tell me, I think I've got enough money to get me through this particular phase. No, knock up a spreadsheet and work out exactly what it is. What's the fact? What's the fact of exactly how much money you need to earn over the course of the year to survive? And most people can't give you that sort of information. So again, turning things from assumptions to facts, to truth, and from that place. I've got to bring into the conversations as well the idea of consciousness. So for a long time I taught, and you've probably heard this formula, knowledge plus experience equals wisdom. Who's heard the knowledge plus experience equals wisdom? So what I've found with that, and I'm, very interested in going deep dive on things, I'm like, yeah, okay, I had the knowledge, I've even had the experience, and I did the same stupid thing again. So that's not enough. I'm not wise. Like, what makes me wise? And that wise person who makes good decisions. And what I've learned over the course of, and it was really here working at the practice that I really cemented this idea that knowledge plus experience equals potential wisdom. And that potential wisdom doesn't become real wisdom in real life circumstance until we add consciousness to it. So it's the infusion of consciousness with that. Because consciousness brings us into this eternal present moment. And consciousness causes us to look at what's the reality. Consciousness allows us in that moment to look at what we've learned over the course of our life. Consciousness says, okay, here's the reality here. Here's what I know. What's applicable for this particular situation? So consciousness holds me there, exploring with curiosity, with this deeper sense of awareness. And from that place, then I can make a good decision. So again, it comes back to this idea, are we conscious when we're fearful? Like, how conscious are we when we're fearful? How broad a perspective do we have on life when we're fearful? It's like we're looking through a toilet roll, trying to solve our problems in life. So consciousness provides us this broad perspective. And it's like someone in the weeds trying to figure their way through the forest versus someone up in the helicopter having an overall perspective of it. So again, the better decisions come from the broader perspective we have of all the pieces. So consciousness is the allowance of that broader perspective. And that consciousness isn't then just our five senses that are tuned into that show. It's beyond that. It's, dabbling into the unified quantum field, this electromagnetic field around us. So again, if we want to become, expert decision makers, we need to work on raising our level of consciousness. Like that's a given. And again, those practices, for me, meditation, breath work. Octavio's just shared with me a beautiful breath work Kriya teaching from David Goulet, his teacher, again to fortify us so that we can stay in that center of grace and calm, while things are shifting around us. And from that place, then we can start making these decisions. So again, I don't even want to step into the decision-making process until I've got myself into that elevated state of consciousness. So absolutely essential. So time out. Am I in the right physical state? Am I in the right emotional state? Do I have a high level of consciousness? And that knowledge piece, I'm a student. I love teaching, but I call myself a student. I'm constantly learning new stuff. And I read broad topics, so, I can take information from each of those and bring them together. I, might watch something on a YouTube thing and I'm like, okay, where's the book on this thing? It might be a 20-minute presentation of the essence of it, but I want to understand, how they wove their way to get that. Because that gives me a deeper understanding of how they got to where they are. And again, that deepens the resource that I've got to make those decisions. The other one that I think is of value is critical thinking. And again, I think critical thinking has been a bit lax over the last, we've very much seen it over the last 18 months, but for quite some time, I think we've not taught or, truly learned this idea of critical thinking. So critical thinking for me is I look at all the information that I've got. I work out if there's any skill gaps and I upgrade on information. But here's the piece most people don't put into it. I need to ask myself, what's self-evident? And I think that's the thing that's been missing, most clearly over the last 12, 18 months. What's self-evident? So I don't think people have dropped into that place. And it's very difficult to drop into that place if you're in a state of fear and if you don't have that elevated level of consciousness. So I can hear this stuff from here. So I take that in and part of my decision-making process, I take that in, but then I stop. The other part is, what's self-evident for me? What am I seeing? What am I sensing? What am I feeling? And I bring that into this decision-making process. And again, I think that's been left out significantly. There's a book I talk about in my book called Embraining. I forget the two authors of it. One's got a hard name for me to remember. I think the other one's Oka. But the book talks about using your head, heart, and your gut. So I've got, like, at the back of the book, like, just simple strategies. And one of the simple strategies they talk about is, start with the heart. Like, decision, what's my heart telling me? So I get a sense of what my heart is telling me. And the heart is this deep wisdom. And you can't hear that deep wisdom. It speaks softly, quietly. Like, if you're flapping around too much, you can't hear the wisdom of your heart. So again, this need to drop in, tap into consciousness. So I ask my heart and I get clear of what's my heart most desire in this decision. Then I take it up to my head and I say, okay, from an intellectual, sharpened buddhi, upper mind perspective, with this decision, what are potential options with that? Then I take it down to my gut. And I think gut is like so much like, from a biological perspective, the biology is like either moving towards life affirming, or moving away something that's not life affirming. So at a gut level, we get an intuitive sense and then bring it back to the heart. So the decision comes from here. So again, the heart's got, a greater electromagnetic field. It's the thing that's going to influence the space around it, the people around it. It's going to start reorganizing the quantum field into whatever it is you want to manifest. So too often I've seen people make choices with all heart and not bring this in. So we need to make sure we bring these things in. Intuitive, yeah, it's good to tap into intuitive, but drop back in, what's my heart telling me? Because the heart might have a bigger awareness. Like, let's call the heart or the soul. It just drops us back in closer to source, which gives us that deeper level of awareness of the right choice in that moment. When I was working at the practice, I'd been at the practice for about 5 years, and then I was like getting this yearning to move on, and I was like, do I stay or do I go? And I loved working here, and loved the crew that we were working with, and loved this beautiful team who are recording this video now. So it was like, okay, I'd had some arguments with Octavia about something, and I was pissed off with him for whatever reason. But I said, I'm not going to make a decision while I'm in that agitated state. Like, let me just step back. So I take off up to the east coast of Bali, a place in Chandidasa. Free plug for Pondok Pisang, if you ever come to Bali, beautiful place. I write most of my books there. So I go up to that place and I drop in. I do a meditation and I just drop in and I ask myself a yes or no question. I ask myself, do I stay with the practice or do I move on into my next venture? And it was just a simple yes. I get that sense of, yeah, that's the right choice. Now, it might take a little bit of work to disentangle myself, to, move out, shift around. But if I make a decision, the truth decision, the right decision, in that moment, it just feels right. It feels like there's a choir of angels singing, like to support the validity of that choice you just made. And then the next question I asked was, do I stay invested in the business? And again, another really interesting choice because the business was very successful. So it's like, let me just drop into that. And the feedback was, no, I move on. I let go of my involvement in it and I move on to something else. So I made those decisions when I went super deep. So that's the last piece I want to talk about, is this internal guidance system. Like going deeper, particularly on the really life important stuff. And there's a coach I really like, Michael Neal, wrote a book called Super Coach and a few other books. And he says this internal guidance system is like the GPS, unit that we either have on our phones and cars and that sort of stuff. And with a GPS, if you get off course, it recalibrates to bring you back on. So we might make a bad choice, and I've made some horrendous choices. But I make that poor choice, but life reorganizes itself to bring me back on track if I continue to dip into, checking on that internal guidance system. So again, knowing that life is for us and not against us. If we make a poor choice, that's okay. Life reorganizes. I mean, the intelligence of life is beyond our little brains to comprehend. So we need to tap in as best as we can, drop into these states, feel, sense something at that level, and from that place, okay, this is either this direction, this path, or it's this path. So those are the main things I wanted to cover off. I wanted to share a good decision. I've talked about bad decisions like that. That one that I made in the hotel where I lost all my money, and it was just a train wreck for about 6 or 7 years. It was just emotionally disastrous. But I'm an optimist, so I say everything is an opportunity to learn and grow. So I call it my MBA. And that MBA allowed me to get involved with the practice and have the experience I had with the practice. So again, the internal guidance system recalibrated me to bring me into this different course. So that was a powerful thing for me. So my good choice, as I was sort of flicking through the memory banks, was when I was in the military for, my 14 years. Before I left, I used up all my leave and I traveled through South America, and I remember being in Tikal ruins in Guatemala. And I'm up the top of this pyramid, and the sun's coming up and the screaming monkeys are in the background in the jungle. Just gorgeous. And I get my diary out and I write down what I want in a job once I leave the military. Like in that just perfect, beautiful moment when I was just really plugged in, I wrote down exactly what I wanted in my next move. Then I finish my holidays, I come back to the military. I resigned from the military. A mate of mine sets up a job interview. I have that job interview a couple of weeks after I get back, and I get offered the job. And it was quite a decent job, quite a decent salary and package, especially since it was the first job from leaving the military. But I got my little journal out that I'd written up while I was overseas, and it didn't tick a couple of the boxes. So I ended up turning it down, much to the surprise of the people offering me the job and my friends around me. Like, are you stupid? What are you turning this down for? And then 4 weeks later, I got offered the opportunity to go over to Salt Lake City to work on the Winter Olympics over there. So again, that trust and faith in life. And so often we think we need to make that, that next choice. Part of this moving through life with ease and grace is, plugging into that source connection and really tapping into that ability to trust and have faith in life, delivering things in the way maybe that you didn't expect it to come, but having, faith and trust that this thing is part of what's needed for your evolutionary growth. So again, like being in that place. So as much as, I learned from my military stuff, very formal decision-making stuff, the more work I've done deeper inward, the more I realize that needs to be brought into the decision-making process as well. What am I feeling inside, and trusting that along the way. So that's all I have for this evening. Has anyone got any questions, any comments, anything you'd like to bring up? I was getting interviewed the other day and for a podcast, and we talked about this book, and I was interviewed by Monty Hook, and he's been a serial entrepreneur since he was about 80, he's about 40 now. So he was saying, I make really quick decisions, what's your take on quick decisions? And I'm like, okay, here's my take. With you particularly, you've had this, 30-something years of experience, so you've got this experience and this intuitive knowledge. So it might look like a quick decision you're making in that moment, but you're actually tapping into all of this. And he's a fairly solid, grounded, calm, level-headed, gets it sort of guy. So, he's not in a reactive state when he's making those. He's just dropping in, yeah, this feels it. And he probably doesn't even know intuitively why he's made that decision. So yes, it's okay to make quick decisions if you've got that experience to back it up. So I wouldn't say that to someone who's just starting out on their entrepreneurial journey. don't think, I'm just going to, rattle off these quick decisions, because I've seen Monty over there rattle off these quick decisions. Like, there's been that experience there. Octavio's been doing his yoga deep dive for 20 plus years. So you might ask him a question and he just blurts something out. Like, that's because it's come from all of this background there. So bring that into the process as well. Be okay with those quick decisions so long as you have that experience behind it. If there's no questions, then I'll just hang around informally after this conversation as well. So if you've got anything to ask me, I'm going to wrap it up for those that are watching this on the big video screen or the small video screen. You're probably looking at this one. Thank you so much for joining me wherever you are on this beautiful, gorgeous, incredible planet of ours. Have an absolutely fantastic day and take care. I got back home and I realised I hadn't mentioned how to actually get a copy of the Decision Making Mastery book that I spoke on. So you can get a Kindle version or paperback version through Amazon, and just last week I finished the audiobook version. So to get the audiobook version, you'll need to go to my website, details down below, carlmassy.com, books tab, and away you go, you'll find that there. And what I'm going to do for a limited period of time, somewhere between 14 and 30 days, we'll just make the audiobook the same price as the paperback. So $8.99 for that. So that will be the price for the audiobook for a shorter period of time before it goes back up to 20 bucks. I'd love to share with you, continue this journey of upskilling, upgrading your decision-making mastery so that you can be a co-creator in your destiny. So if that sounds like fun for you, check out the book. Thank you very much for joining me. Have a fantastic day.